Alright, buckle up, because if you'd told me 5 years ago I'd wind up taking down the self-proclaimed queen of Sapphire Bay with nothing but a battered briefcase and a century-old map, I'd have called you nuts. But that's exactly what happened. This isn't the story of a hero or a crusader. It's about a guy who just wanted some peace, and what happens when you try to take that from the wrong person. You know what I mean? Let me back up a sec. The morning it all kicked off, I was standing on my own pier with a mug of cheap coffee, still half asleep, when Celeste Harrington's voice came slicing through the salt air like broken glass. She was there, heels clacking on teak, lips curled in a coral grin, surrounded by a pack of HOA loyalists clutching their phones like trophies. She had my floating house in her sights, clutching a sheaf of auction papers and telling me, with the certainty of someone who's never heard no, that my home was being sold off the next day, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. Except there was. See, I'd spent 72 hours holed up with a yellowed old map, courtesy of Sapphire Bay's former librarian, and it changed everything. When I calmly told Celeste she'd just trespassed on private maritime territory, a federal crime, by the way, her face drained to the color of raw dough. The mob behind her, all eager for my humiliation, suddenly started looking real nervous. They were about to witness a very different show than the one she'd promised. Within 3 days, Celeste Harrington would be in FBI custody on more charges than I could count, her little empire of intimidation crumbling. And me? I'd end up owning not just my house, but the entire Sapphire Bay Marina. But let me not get ahead of myself. I'm Beckett Sterling, ex-Navy engineer. 18 months before this circus, I was living out of a rented room, fresh out of the military, scraping by with odd jobs that barely used any of the skills I'd picked up blowing up Soviet-era bunkers underwater. I was adrift until one weird day, I happened to pull a billionaire out of a sinking yacht. Harrison Blackstone, yes, that one, was so grateful, he handed me the deed to a place I never could have dreamed of owning. An old ocean observation station, built on concrete pillars way out over the water, hurricane-proof and absolutely unique. The place became my whole world. I fixed what needed fixing, installed solar panels, let the ocean be my soundtrack, and tried to stitch my life back together after losing my wife Sarah to cancer. The locals kept their distance, at first. Fishermen started waving. Kids asked to fish off my dock. I finally had a quiet kind of peace, until Celeste rolled up in her white Bentley one muggy September morning and declared war. Picture her. Perfectly pressed linen, platinum hair, 2 assistants in tow, armed with iPads and overconfidence. She announced the HOA was taking over, waving a fake charter that was more loophole than law, claiming my home dragged down property values. She offered me a buyout so laughably low I nearly spit my coffee out. 300 grand for a house worth 10 times that, not even counting the water rights I didn't realize I owned yet. When I refused, her threats got real sharp, real quick. You could feel it. This wasn't about my house. It was about clearing the way for some mega development. She made it clear. The HOA had ways to encourage compliance. The next week, I got my first violation notice, $500 for unpainted metal. Stainless steel railings, designed not to rust, but apparently not up to Celeste's aesthetic standards. Day 2, 3 more notices. Noise from ocean waves, barnacles on the pillars, unauthorized dolphins, I kid you not, and on and on. By week's end, I was $8,000 in the hole for crimes against taste and the laws of nature. If you've ever dealt with a nightmare HOA, you know it doesn't stop there. Phone calls at all hours, mailbox stuffed with threats, building inspectors popping by. It felt like siege warfare, paperwork and pressure instead of bullets and bombs. That's when Robert Williamson, retired professor and my nearest neighbor, gave me the real lowdown. Celeste had done this before. Target a family, drown them in fines and legal fees, then flip their land to her husband's development company for pennies on the dollar. The whole thing was rigged. Her cousin was the county commissioner, her brother-in-law the judge. No one had managed to fight back and win. But she'd picked the wrong guy to push this far. The night 2 of her goons tried to sabotage my security cameras, something old and dangerous woke up inside me. I almost went full Navy SEAL on them, slipping into the water, knife in hand, ready to make the problem disappear forever. The only thing that stopped me was a photo of Sarah on my workshop wall, her words echoing. Real strength isn't what you can do, It's what you choose not to do. I called the cops instead and decided to fight Celeste with law, not violence. Enter Eleanor Whitfield, Sapphire Bay's walking archive, who handed me the folder that would tip the whole game. Inside, maritime deeds, old maps, and a grant from 1892 that said my family, not the HOA, not the marina, not the county, owned all the waterfront for 2 miles in each direction. My house, the marina, every fancy yacht slip, technically, all on my land. When I tracked the paperwork, paid for a title search, and got confirmation from 3 lawyers, I realized I could not only claim back rent, but blow open everything Celeste had built. The twist? I wasn't alone anymore. David Nguyen, a lawyer whose family Celeste had ruined, still had every piece of evidence. Captain Rodriguez, forced out for a bogus zoning violation, had video of Celeste taking cash from foreign buyers. And Sophia Blackwood, an investigative journalist, had been piecing together a web of shell companies, bribes, and fraud going back 13 years. So we planned the counterattack, legal action, press leaks, a timeline to drop everything at once. Celeste, meanwhile, kept pushing. She scheduled an auction of my home for maximum humiliation. Press, neighbors, developers, the whole show. But the morning of the auction, I showed up early in my best suit, armed with the original deed, the authenticated map, and a flash drive of video evidence. I let her grandstand, let her work the crowd, and then, right as she called for bids, I stepped forward. I laid out the truth. My family owned the Merino land. Celeste's documents were forged, and oh, by the way, here's her on tape taking illegal bribes. The crowd turned. The mood flipped. That's when the FBI showed up, blue jackets, badges flashing. Celeste and her husband arrested on federal charges: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy. I've never heard a more satisfying sound than those handcuffs clicking shut. But that wasn't the real victory. Standing on the same podium where Celeste had just been hauled off, I told the crowd what I'd do with all this unexpected power. I'd go after the developers and commercial interests for the back rent. For the regular families, the ones who'd suffered under Celeste, I'd waive any claims if they'd testify about the harassment. The relief in the air was palpable, fear turning to hope as people shared stories of years of petty tyranny. The weeks that followed were wild. Celeste's arrest triggered investigations across the state. The new HOA board was made up of her former victims. Fees and fines vanished, gardens bloomed, families returned. The settlement money paid for repairs, scholarships, and a conservation trust to protect the bay forever. Sophia and I grew closer. She won awards for her reporting, but we both stayed. I turned the lower level of my house into a maritime museum, teaching kids about ocean history and the importance of standing up to bullies. Rodriguez started a sailing program for underprivileged kids. The community that had been divided by fear became stronger and more colorful than ever. Every morning I walked the pier, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over water that's finally free of secrets and scams. Sometimes I think about that night, the knife, the darkness, how easy it would have been to let anger win. But real strength, like Sarah said, is in the choices you don't make. I kept the knife, mounted in a glass box in the museum, with a plaque, "Choose restoration, not destruction." People still ask what I'd do if I had to do it all over again. Would I fight? Would I let it go? I tell them the same thing. Shine enough light on a lie, and it falls apart. The real victory isn't bringing down a tyrant. It's what you build after the dust settles. So, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you go for revenge or restoration? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you've ever stood up to a bully, HOA or otherwise, hit like, share this, and let's keep the conversation going. Because the only thing stronger than power abused is a community that stands together. You know what I mean?